July 4, 1946. A hill outside Gdansk, Poland. 5 gallows. 5 women. 200,000 people, watching. Not soldiers. Not generals. Women. Some of them were younger than you are right now. And I'll tell you something the history books won't. They didn't all look afraid. Some of them were smiling. This is the story of the public hangings of the Stutthof female guards. What they did. What they said at the end. And why 200,000 people came to watch. But here's the question nobody wants to sit with. How does an ordinary woman become this? Stutthof, 1939. A small camp near Danzig, now Gdansk, Poland. The first Nazi concentration camp built outside German borders. And the last to be liberated. On paper, it started as a civilian internment site. On paper. I've heard that word used a lot. Internment. Like it was temporary. Manageable. Like people went in, and eventually came out. They didn't. Over 110,000 prisoners passed through Stutthof's gates. Jews. Poles. Soviet POWs. Political prisoners. 65,000 of them. Never left. Forced labor. Starvation. Disease. Torture. And when that wasn't fast enough, a gas chamber. But here's what the history books buried for decades. The men running that camp weren't running it alone. They were called Aufseherinnen, female guards, trained at Ravensbrück, assigned to Stutthof, given uniforms, given authority, given power over human lives. And some of them took to it, like they'd been waiting for exactly that. They weren't passive administrators. They weren't reluctant participants. Witnesses described women who beat prisoners to death with their bare hands, who selected inmates for the gas chamber, who smiled doing it. And here's the detail that should stop you cold. Several of them volunteered. Not conscripted. Not threatened. Volunteered. When I first heard that, I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want it to be true. But it was. And that single fact changes every question you're about to ask. How does a person choose this? Gdansk, April 1946. The war had been over for less than a year. The bodies were barely cold. And already, the world wanted answers. The Stutthof Trials began. I remember thinking, finally, after everything we'd seen, after everything we'd survived, someone was going to have to stand up and answer for it. 13 men, 6 women, all charged with crimes against humanity. The courtroom heard weeks of testimony. Survivor after survivor, taking the stand, describing the indescribable. You want to know what that room felt like? Imagine having to sit 3 feet away from the person who decided whether your mother lived or died, and having to speak calmly, having to use words. The accusations against the female guards were specific. Brutal beatings, torture, roll calls designed to break the body and the spirit, personal participation in selections for the gas chamber. Victims included children, the elderly, people who could no longer stand on their own feet. And yet, in that courtroom, something unexpected happened. Some of the accused showed no remorse, no fear. Wanda Klaff stood in front of survivors, in front of a judge, and stated openly, "I am very intelligent and very devoted to my work in the camps. I don't have words for that." That statement tells you everything about the psychology at work here. These women didn't see themselves as criminals. They saw themselves as professionals. That's not just disturbing. That's a structural failure of moral reasoning so complete, it almost doesn't fit inside a courtroom. May 31, 1946. The verdicts came down. 11 death sentences. 5 of them women. Method of execution. Public hanging. Public. Not private. Not quiet. Public. That word was chosen deliberately. And when I heard it, I understood why. Some things need to be witnessed. Some things need to be seen. The date was set. July 4, 1946. Biskupia Górka Hill. 5 gallows. And 5 women who still, in some part of themselves, may not have believed it would actually happen. Jenny Wanda Bachmann, 24 years old. They called her the Beautiful Spectre. That nickname wasn't random. It was a warning dressed as a compliment. Beauty weaponized as camouflage. Witnesses placed her walking the camp with a whip in hand. Selecting prisoners for the gas chamber? Personal. Deliberate. Unhurried. You know what's worse than someone who does it out of rage? Someone who does it calmly. Like it's just another Tuesday. Like you're just another problem to be solved. In court? No remorse. No explanation. Just a cold, detached stare. Defiant to the last. And at the scaffold, dressed carefully. Deliberately. As if appearance still mattered. As if she was still in control of something. Moments before the trapdoor opened, she allegedly whispered, "Life is indeed beautiful." I've thought about those words for a long time. I still don't know what they mean. Maybe that's the point. A woman who spent years deciding who lived and who died. Performing until the very end. Not breaking. Not apologizing. Performing. You are paradise. A different kind of cruelty entirely. No whip. No visible rage. Just ice. The cold ones were always worse. Anger burns out eventually. Cold doesn't. Roll calls stretched for hours. Sub-zero temperatures. She doused prisoners with water in freezing weather. As punishment. Stood and watched. Expressionless. There's a particular kind of sadism in indifference. It communicates something beyond cruelty. It says, "You are so beneath me, I don't even need to feel anything to destroy you." In court, formal denials. No emotion. On execution day, calm, composed, until the noose was fixed. Then she broke. Completely. Her body convulsed at the end of the rope, and the crowd went silent. That collapse at the final moment tells you everything about what she believed right up until that second. She thought something would save her. Nothing did. Wanda Claff. Former housewife. Volunteer. A housewife. She went from running a home to running prisoners. And somewhere in between, she stopped seeing the difference. She beat women for the smallest infractions. Participated in lethal selections. Seemed to take satisfaction in it. And in court, you already know what she said. "I am very intelligent and very devoted to my work." Not a slip. Not a breakdown. A considered statement. From someone who genuinely believed the work was worth being proud of. Survivors were sitting right there. Right there. At the gallows. The arrogance evaporated. Tears ran down her face as the sentence was carried out. The pride lasted right up until reality arrived. And then, it didn't. What does it take to maintain that level of self-belief? All the way to the edge of a scaffold. Before it finally cracks? I'm not sure I want to know the answer. Elizabeth Becker. 22 years old. A few months at Stutthof. Just a few months. Which raises a question worth sitting with. How much time does it take to become complicit in something like this? Apparently, not long. She participated in prisoner selections. Brutal roll calls. After the war, she fled. Was eventually arrested. And from her cell, she wrote letters. Letters. Asking for forgiveness. Claiming she was forced. That she had no choice. She wasn't the only one to make that claim. But here's what the court weighed against those letters. Survivor testimony. Specific. Detailed. Consistent. The letters didn't stand a chance. At the gallows? Pale. Terrified. No last words. The quietest one. Maybe that says something. Maybe the silence was the first honest thing she'd offered? Since the war ended. Gerda Steinhoff. 23 years old. Block leader. The one that stays with you. I said earlier that the cold ones were worse. I lied. The ones who enjoyed it were worse. Witnesses said she laughed as she beat prisoners. No hesitation during executions. No visible conflict. Just enjoyment. There's a clinical term for what witnesses described. But applying it almost feels like an excuse. Like it explains something that, frankly, shouldn't be explainable. In court, she joked. While her crimes were read aloud, she joked. I've seen a lot of things. Been through a lot of things. But sitting in that courtroom, watching her laugh, that was the moment I understood. Some people are just gone. Or maybe, she genuinely didn't believe the verdict would touch her. That somehow, she was the exception. On the scaffold, smirking. Right up until the moment, she wasn't. Wide-eyed disbelief, witnesses said. As if the trapdoor opening was the first thing that had ever genuinely surprised her. The first moment, reality broke through. 5 women. 5 different faces of the same thing. And standing there, watching, I kept asking myself the same question. How? How does an ordinary person get here? That's not a question with a clean answer. And anyone who tells you it is, hasn't looked closely enough. July 4, 1946. Biskupia Górka Hill, Gdansk, Poland. 200,000 people. I want you to picture that number for a second. Not as a statistic, as a crowd. 200,000 human beings. Who woke up that morning, got dressed, and walked to a hill, to watch 5 women hang. They came from across the region. Survivors, citizens, witnesses. Some brought their children. And that detail alone deserves a pause. Parents brought children to a public execution. Was that wrong? Or was it the most honest history lesson those children would ever receive? The gallows stood at the top of the hill. 5 of them, built specifically for this day. The condemned were led out one by one. The crowd wasn't uniform. Some cheered. Some wept quietly. Some just watched, like they needed to see it with their own eyes to believe it was real. I understood that. What made this execution historically unique wasn't just the gender of the condemned. It was who carried out the sentence. Some of the executioners were former prisoners of Stutthof themselves. Take a moment with that. People who had been stripped of everything in that camp. Their dignity, their families, their names, were handed the rope. Was that justice? Restoration? Or was it something more complicated than either of those words can hold? Don't ask me to call it complicated. Not that day. Not standing on that hill. The executions were carried out one after another. No delays. No ceremony beyond the act itself. Bachmann first, then the others. The Polish authorities made this public deliberately. The message wasn't subtle. War crimes have consequences. Gender is not a shield. Youth is not an excuse. And impunity is not permanent. By the time it was over, the hill was quiet. 200,000 people. And almost no sound. I've been asked many times what justice feels like. Whether that day felt like closure. Honestly, it felt like the end of one silence, and the beginning of another. Before we go further, something worth asking yourself right now, sitting where you are. Would you have been on that hill? Would you have needed to see it? Or would you have stayed home and trusted that justice happened? There's no wrong answer, but drop it in the comments below, because that question says more about how we process accountability than any verdict ever could. And if this kind of history is what you're here for, the subscribe button is right there. We go deeper every single time. After July 4, 1946, the world moved on, as it always does. More trials followed, more verdicts, but few carried the same weight. Few were as visible. And here's what that visibility revealed. For years after the war, female guards were largely absent from public discourse. Not because the evidence wasn't there, because the assumption wasn't. People didn't want to believe it, even after seeing it, even after the testimonies, the photographs, the names. There was still this resistance. Like the mind kept trying to find an exit, a reason it couldn't be true. And that resistance is actually the most dangerous part of this story, because it tells us something uncomfortable about how we assign guilt. We filtered it through gender, through appearance, through age. The beautiful Spectre understood that filter perfectly. She dressed for the scaffold like she was still using it. The Stutthof executions forced a reckoning. For the first time, publicly, undeniably, the world had to confront the fact that women could be perpetrators. Not bystanders. Not victims. Perpetrators. And even then, it took decades for that truth to fully settle. Decades for historians to write it properly. Decades for it to be taught. Some would argue it still isn't. Which brings us to 2022. Irmgard Furchner, a former secretary at Stutthof. Not a guard. Not a block leader. A secretary. Convicted of war crimes. At age 97. 97 years old. 76 years after the war ended. She lived a full life. A long life. While survivors didn't. And yet the court still pursued it. Still prosecuted. Still convicted. Because the law made a decision that history keeps having to relearn. Accountability doesn't expire. It doesn't care how old you are. It doesn't care how quiet you've been. It doesn't care how ordinary your life looked. After the extraordinary things you did, the legacy of Biskupia Górka Hill is complicated. Some see those executions as justified retribution. Others debate the ethics of public punishment, whether spectacle serves justice or replaces it. Both arguments have weight. But here's what can't be argued. Those executions changed something. They inserted a truth into the public record that couldn't be quietly filed away. Evil isn't always a man in uniform. Sometimes it's a 23-year-old woman, laughing in a courtroom, certain, right up until the trapdoor opens, that none of this will ever reach her. And the terrifying part isn't that it reached her. It's how long she believed it wouldn't. The question the Stutthof Trials left behind wasn't just about those 5 women. It was about every institution, every system, every culture that created the conditions for them to exist and thrived while doing it. We answered the question of guilt in 1946. We're still working on the larger one. July 4, 1946. 5 gallows. 5 women. 200,000 witnesses. The sentences were carried out. The verdicts were recorded. Justice was served. Was it? I've been asking myself that for a long time. The law said yes. The court said yes. The crowd mostly said yes. But here's what the verdict couldn't answer. Why did it take a public execution for the world to accept that women could commit atrocities? Why did it take a rope for people to believe the testimony of survivors? We were believed eventually. I suppose that's something. Is it enough? No. But it's what we got. The 5 women hanged at Biskupia Górka Hill chose their roles, chose their actions, chose right up until the choice was taken from them. History recorded what they did. But history is quieter about what made them possible. The system that recruited them, the ideology that shaped them, the society that looked away until it couldn't anymore. I think about the survivors who stood on that hill, who watched, who maybe felt something close to peace for the first time in years. I don't begrudge them that, not for a single second. But peace and justice aren't always the same thing. And sometimes, the most honest thing history can offer us is the gap between them. Stutthof was liberated in 1945. The trials concluded in 1946. The last known perpetrator was convicted in 2022. The last survivor is still alive somewhere, still carrying it. And we sit here, decades later, trying to understand something that maybe was never meant to be understood, only remembered, only never forgotten. So here's where we leave you, not with an answer, with the question that matters most. 200,000 people stood on that hill and watched, and history still can't fully agree on what they witnessed. Justice, retribution, theater, necessity, maybe all of it, maybe none of it. What we can agree on is that it happened, that those 5 women existed, that 65,000 people died in that camp, and that somewhere between those 2 facts lies everything worth understanding about human nature. Remember the names, not just theirs, the ones they took. So tell me, sitting where you are right now, after everything you've just heard, what do you think justice looked like on that hill? Was it the verdict, the rope, the crowd, or something that still hasn't arrived yet? Drop your answer below, because that conversation is worth having. And if this is the kind of history you want to keep exploring, the kind that doesn't give you easy answers, that sits with you after the screen goes dark, subscribe. We don't do comfortable here. We do honest. New video dropping soon. And trust me, you'll want to be here for it.